everyone. My name is Lydia Kariuki, and I'm a senior scientist with CloudLIMS.com. And today I'm very much excited to be taking you through a very important discussion that not only impacts on the efficiency and productivity of your lab, but it also impacts on the profitability of your lab. Specifically, we'll be talking about your lab's laboratory information management system, assuming that you have one in place. And I'll be taking you through some telltale signs that highlights to you that the LIMS that you have in place is outdated and needs to be upgraded. Along the way, I'll highlight some of the challenges that labs face when they have an outdated LIMS. And consequently, I'll point out some key features that you should be on the lookout for when you want to upgrade a new LIMS. So welcome everyone again, and I hope you're going to have an interesting discussion. So to lay some background, let's first define what a LIMS is. A LIMS is a software system that manages lab data, samples, and workflows in a nutshell. The main role of a LIMS is to automate tasks, ensure compliance, and maintain data integrity. At this point, I'd like to mention that there are two kinds of LIMS. An on-premise LIMS. This kind of LIMS is hosted within the lab infrastructure, and consequently, it will give the lab a feeling of being in control of the system and security of this LIMS. However, this kind of LIMS may be a bit more expensive to set up because it involves a lot of startup costs to put everything together. This is as opposed to the second kind of LIMS, which is a cloud-hosted LIMS. And this kind of LIMS is hosted on remote servers over the internet. Mostly, it's provided by third-party vendor, and consequently, it's paid for by the lab on a subscription basis. Could be monthly or yearly subscriptions, meaning that there are no upfront costs. And such kind of LIMS also offers the benefit of scalability, and you might receive support from the third-party vendor, meaning that your lab can operate with a small, leaner IT team. So with that background, let's move to something else, which is the growing adoption of LIMS. I'll refer to a research that was conducted by a group known as Research Nesta and was published last year. That was 2024. The value of the LIMS market was at 2.26 billion USD. And this value is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of about 6% per year, meaning that the value by 2037 will be 5.36 billion. This is quite remarkable. And what does this mean to you as a lab manager? First, what's fueling this growth? We have technological advancements. Here we're thinking about automation and AI, which I'm sure we have witnessed in our industries. And what does this mean to you as a lab manager? The LIMS market, as the LIMS market grows, you expect to see the LIMS that we have in the market also evolving. Originally, the LIMS that we had were only designed to handle simple workflows, managing basic data and samples. Over time, the LIMS have evolved. Right now, we have LIMS that can offer unique features such as integration with lab instruments and third-party softwares, compliance support, better security features. Consequently, it's imperative on you as a lab manager to always be ahead of the game to ensure that the LIMS that you have in place is not only giving you basic support, but is giving you advanced support in your workflow so that you're reaping the maximum benefits from the LIMS that you have. So with that background, we can dive into the meat of our discussion for today, and which is how can you tell that it's time to upgrade the LIMS that you have? As I mentioned, it's very critical for you as a lab manager to always be proactive and ahead of the game to ensure that your LIMS is not only operational, but it's going the extra mile to serve all the needs of your lab. To be able to do this, you need to know some of the warning signs that it alerts to you that this LIMS is not meeting all the needs of your lab, and probably, as you'll see with time, an outdated LIMS is costly to maintain, not only in terms of finances, there are both hidden and direct costs, but in terms of your reputation, in terms of customer satisfaction, and even in terms of the ease with which your staff perform their duties. So with that, we can dive to the first sign that your LIMS is outdated. And that is you have in place a LIMS in place, but it's struggling with growing data volumes. Over time, as your LIMS grows, you expect, as your laboratory grows, you expect to have more sample requests, maybe more testing methods, more instruments, and your LIMS needs to be able to grow with this, to scale with these demands. However, when you have a LIMS that's not able to do this, you may have that you're having frequent system slowdowns, difficulty in retrieving data, especially historical data. As you have more requests in the lab, you will find that the system is lagging or crashing. You may find that you're having longer response times when trying to access historical data or when you're trying to enter new data. All this builds up to increased system errors and data inconsistencies. When you're having, every time you have a lag or a crash, and then you need to come in again to reconcile data, for the data to be reconciled, you may find that you're having more errors or data inconsistencies. And it's going to take your staff a longer time to try to make sense of what's going on. Another thing I'd like to highlight is you might have a LIMS that during off-peak time, whatever time that is for your laboratory, you may find that the LIMS is performing optimally. However, as you have concurrent tasks or multiple users on the system, the LIMS begins to slow down or crash. This means that the LIMS that you're having in place is outdated and needs to be upgraded. The diagram that paints a clear picture of what's going on in your lab when you have an outdated LIMS, you may find that it's more difficult to access historical data. At the same time, you're having slow searches and incomplete query results, and this builds up to it becomes difficult for you to generate demands on the report. So you may find that your staff lab reports are being performed at a slower rate. You may find that now your customers are becoming dissatisfied because they have to wait for a longer time to get their results, and that's something that you do not want to do. So before it gets there, make sure you upgrade to a new LIMS. Brings us to our second point. You have a LIMS in place, however, it's struggling to integrate with new instruments. One of the key features of a modern LIMS or an advanced LIMS or an up-to-date LIMS is that it needs to be able to integrate with your lab instruments seamlessly. However, when you find that you lack the necessary drivers or APIs, and hence you're not being able to integrate with your LIMS is not able to integrate, your staff now have to manually enter data. And this is taking away from one of the key benefits of having a LIMS in place, which is automation. So your staff have to do some manual data entry. This is taking a longer time, and there's an increased chance of introducing errors. Then this is a LIMS that needs to be upgraded. And integration just doesn't stop with instruments. It also goes further to include third-party software. The kind of software will vary based on the lab. Most labs will have a customer relationship management CRM. Labs in the healthcare setting will have electronic health records, electronic lab notebooks, whatever third-party software that you use. It's important that your LIMS is able to integrate well. When this does not happen, you'll find that you have information stuck in different systems. This creates data silos and inefficiencies. Over time, your lab staff will need to do some manual reconciliations. This is time consuming. Not only that, again, increasing the risk of introducing errors. So before it gets to this, you need to consider upgrading to a new LIMS. That point is you have a LIMS that over time has become inflexible or rigid, and consequently, you need to rely on external IT support from time to time. Over time, you expect that as your lab grows, you may need to maybe modify your data fields or existing workflows. You may need to add more instruments, and your LIMS needs to be able to do this perhaps with minimal configuration. However, when your LIMS is not able to do this and consistently you require custom coding, or you need to call in external IT support to be able to make these small changes, that means you have a rigid LIMS, which is not serving the needs of your lab adequately, hence the need to upgrade to a new LIMS. Brings us to our fourth point, which is compliance issues. Most labs, most industries are highly regulated. For example, the clinical diagnostics industry, the cannabis industry, and this comes with multiple compliance requirements. The more highly regulated your industry is, of course, the more compliance requirements that will be incumbent. Just to mention a few, there's ISO 17025 for testing and calibration labs. We have GDPR for use for labs that deal with use citizen data. We have 21 CFR Part 11 that deals with electronic signatures for labs that are FDA regulated. Of course, we have the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act for labs that deal with protected health information of US citizens. Whatever compliance requirements that you have, it's imperative that the LIMS that you have in place is able to support this. When it's not able to support this, this may come with compliance issues, hefty fines, penalties, loss of reputation, even loss of your license, and these are, you do not want to jeopardize your lab in this kind of way. So as you keep checking from time to time to ensure that you're in compliance, you need to check how well the lab is supporting this. And if you notice any inconsistencies, then you need to steadily act and perhaps fix whatever is going on or upgrades to new LIMS. Brings us to sign 5, which is vulnerabilities and data breaches. Labs that deal with sensitive data, which makes up for quite a number of labs, always need to have secure access protocols, such as multi-factor authentication. This is to prevent unauthorized logins and data manipulation. We're aware of cyber security attacks, phishing, ransomware, and all these kind of attacks that may happen when you have a LIMS that's compromised. And this again comes with a lot of implications, such as fines if you exposed your client's data. This may come with fines, reputational damage, the risk of you losing your license, and a number of other very costly implications. So before this happens, make sure that the LIMS that you have from time to time, you need to check if your security features are updated, if it has a regular practice that are required, all the required, let's say, this role-based access controls, and if you always have to make sure that your LIMS at any given point has all these security features. And we cannot overemphasize how this is important. It's not one of those things that is neither here nor there. So if you notice, there's some security issues that may come up because of your LIMS. It's important to address this speedily. If it can be fixed, well and good. However, it's advisable if you notice a compromise, it's advisable that you upgrade to a new LIMS speedily. Point 6 is difficulty onboarding new staff. Your lab staff spend a lot of time working with the LIMS. This is both the new staff and the staff that you have. Modern LIMS should be able to have a user interface that's intuitive and it's user-friendly to make it easy to onboard new staff. But if you find that your staff are taking a longer time to perform basic tasks, or they're constantly calling upon IT to come and help them resolve minor issues, then this LIMS needs to be upgraded, because as we can see, an outdated LIMS may have the implication of higher training costs for staff. Why? It may take a longer time to onboard new staff. If ideally it would take a few days, and that's what you have factored into your budget, you may find that it's taking a longer time, maybe days or even months, because the LIMS is hard to understand or hard to navigate. So if this is happening with the LIMS, it's a clear sign that you need to make an upgrade. And this brings us to the 7th and final point, which is high cost of maintenance and upgrades. An outdated LIMS could be operational, however, it could be very costly to maintain. All the points that we mentioned previously have been building up to this one thing. When you have a LIMS that's outdated, the cost of keeping it running can become very expensive over time, because you're having LIMS that's not able to handle large data volumes, so you have a lot of downtime. You're losing customers, you're losing man hours, you're having a LIMS that's not able to integrate with instruments, or that's rigid, so you require frequent custom coding, calling in external IT support, creating workarounds. You have the risks of errors. This may come with penalties and fines. So all these factors, when you look at this picture, is that you have a LIMS in place, but it's become very expensive to maintain. An outdated LIMS would require frequent patches or fixes. However, you may find that this does not even resolve the underlying issues. This system is outdated and expensive to maintain is the conclusion of this discussion. LIMS that's outdated becomes very expensive to maintain in the long run. Before we wrap this up, let's mention some hidden costs of an outdated LIMS. The first one is difficulty tracking staff adherence to SOPs. When you have a LIMS that's outdated, over time it may lose the ability to track staff adherence to SOPs. And this can be it can come at a very hefty cost, because you may run into compliance issues. And the other hidden cost is customer dissatisfaction. An outdated LIMS builds up to many things over time. And the eventual result is the end customer not being satisfied with the service because they have longer waiting times. They may be getting the wrong results. So, and this is a very hefty, I can say it's probably the most hefty cost to you as a business, because when the customer is not satisfied, in spite of you having the right team on board, in spite of you having everything else on board, an outdated LIMS may cost you your customer at the end of the day. So let's make this more practical by having some real life scenarios. And the first one is a clinical diagnostics lab. Take the example, a patient has come in and they have an acute bacterial infection. So the tests are ordered, but the LIMS that we have in place is outdated. This LIMS is not able to, it's struggling to handle large data volumes. So the process is slow. At the same time, the LIMS is not able to integrate with some instruments. So staff again are having to do some manual data transfers, and then an error is introduced. The patient gets the wrong results. It takes them a longer time to get their result, and even when they get the result, it's a wrong result. They get a wrong treatment, and you can see what the implications of this can be to the customer. Their bacterial infection complicates. At the same time, for the lab, this may mean loss of reputation. It may also mean some penalties, or they may even risk losing their license. An example is, let's look at the cannabis industry, which is very highly regulated, and most states will require compliance with METRC. So the LIMS in this case, there's a LIMS in place, there's a cannabis LIMS, however, it's not able to integrate with METRC. Staff have to do manual transfers of data from the system to METRC. This takes a longer time, and the lab has some audits are audited. And at the same time, some wrong information is transferred while the staff are transferring this data. So the lab is subjected to frequent audits. Then when this is captured that some of their results are not accurate, then they have to pay hefty fines. This also has a public health implication, because when wrong information was captured, some cannabis products that are not up to standard were introduced in the market, and this puts some consumers at risk. So you can see the implication, the full picture of what's going on with this, just because the lab is using an outdated LIMS. Our final example, let's look at the biobanking industry. So you have this research going on. Some genetic samples are involved, and they're stored within the lab. However, the LIMS is outdated. So over time, there is a mix-up. Some samples can't be tracked. This means that the research is prolonged. Results are not generated at the right time. This becomes a very costly research to carry out. And the implications on the lab, That means reputational damage. It may also mean some fines. It may also mean at risk of them probably losing their license. So when you look at this picture of what it may cost your lab to use to keep an outdated LIMS, I think it's obvious at this point that it's more practical or prudent to use a LIMS that's updated at any given point to avoid running into all these problems. That background, let's look at some key features to look for when you want to acquire a new and modern LIMS that serves the needs of your lab. The first one is scalability. This comes in to ensure that as your lab grows, you're able to handle the increased demands on data volumes. The second one is integration capability. You want a LIMS that's able to integrate seamlessly with your lab instruments as well as third-party software because of all the reasons that we mentioned. You also want to have a LIMS in place that supports all your compliance requirements. You want a LIMS in place that has the most advanced security features, especially when you're in an industry where data breaches can come at a very hefty cost. Thinking here, multi-factor authentication, regular security updates and patches. Then you also want a LIMS that's user-friendly. You want your staff to have an easy time navigating this LIMS. So make sure that the user interface is intuitive. It takes a shorter time to onboard your staff, and it's easy to carry out tasks with the LIMS. Then there are other considerations. Once you have looked at all the features that your lab needs and you've picked a LIMS that's suitable, it's also important to consider the vendor support that you're going to get. What's the reputation of this vendor and what's the experience in your particular industry? A vendor who has particular experience in your industry can be able to customize a solution that suits the needs of your lab. Of course, it's also important to consider the price point. You need to have value for your money, but also you need to go further to consider long-term support, especially if you're considering LIMS that's provided by third-party vendor, and some hidden costs of the LIMS, of acquiring the LIMS, of keeping it running, and of any upgrades. Are you going to be charged extra for customizations, integrations? You need to put all those considerations together before you make your choice. Now, with that background, we have discovered that we need a new LIMS. We have picked the features and an appropriate vendor. How do we prepare for the upgrade process? The primary consideration to make is data migration, because you will be required to transfer data from your existing LIMS to this new LIMS. While planning for this, what's the user training? Are your staff and everyone else equipped to be able to make the upgrade? Are they familiar with this new LIMS, how it's going to be used? Do they know their unique roles? There's also a key consideration is downtime minimization. You want your business to be running even as you make the transition. So are you going to do a first out transition? Are you going to do it all at once? And if you go with that direction, how will you minimize on the downtime? And lastly, we have stakeholder alignment. A LIMS upgrade is not a one-person decision. This is something that involves various teams. Could be your lab staff, your IT team, probably human resource, supplies, and even finance. Whoever is involved in the process needs to be on board, and they need to understand what their role is, what their requirements are, and what the objective of the LIMS upgrade is. And that brings us to the end of our discussion today. We have walked through the key warning signs of an outdated LIMS, the implications of that, both direct costs and hidden costs. We've talked about how to pick new LIMS, the features to be on the lookout for. We've talked about how to pick a vendor. And finally, we've talked about how to prepare for the upgrade process. Now, before we wrap up, let's briefly do a recap of the 7 warning signs of LIMS that's outdated, because that was the focus of our discussion for today. And we talked about a LIMS that's struggling with increasing data volumes, and hence it's slowing down. We also talked about LIMS that's finding it difficult to integrate with your lab instruments, as well as third-party software. We talked about a LIMS that's rigid or inflexible. And consequently, you need to rely on external IT support from time to time. We talked about a LIMS that's not supporting your compliance requirements. We talked about a LIMS that lacks the necessary security features, and hence you're exposed to data breaches. We also talked about a LIMS that makes it difficult for you to onboard new staff. And lastly, we talked about a LIMS that's very expensive to keep operational over time. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you very much for sticking through this discussion, and I hope you had an interesting time and you learned a thing or two. Thank you very much and have a lovely time.